companies take these scaling frameworks and they just go at them and they go, okay, I got the framework, I got the path, execute the recipe card, and they're wondering, why aren't we winning in the market?
Many organizations focus on a buzzword, whether it's agile or lean or DevOps or SAFe or less or whatever it is. It can easily become the end rather than the means to the end.
I've been in a transformation that lasted 34 days.
A previous company I was at, we were delivering maybe 30 to 40%, of our commitments. So when we started implementing Scaled Agile frameworks and things like that, we went to 80% and then 90% program predictability. And that is a huge win, because then that's what other departments in the organization saw. What they commit to, they deliver 90% of the time. How do we get that? How do we change what we're doing? Because what we're doing isn't working.
Wow, I guess that's the perfect description of what we want when we scale Agile. The question is, how do we get that? How do we get as agile as Sean's company?
My current organization deals with healthcare. So this past year, we were focused on flu and then COVID hit. We changed, we pivoted and immediately started focusing all our efforts to the COVID information. And that is the beauty of being agile. You can pivot. You can stop and say, oh, I know we planned for this, but the market has changed. We need to pivot so we can be, the Cadillac, the pinnacle, the tip of the spear, and everybody else can follow us.
All right, so to answer this question of how do we get what Sean is describing, the following Project Scagile webinar focuses on one thing: how do we get the start right when we want to implement agile methods, when we want to scale agile, when we want to do this agile transformation? Because obviously the first impression counts on leadership and on employee level. So let's say you already have a few teams that are organized in Scrum or Kanban, as many of you probably have. What would be the very first step that we need if we want to scale Agile?
Now, there's also the ultimate goal of, okay, the way that we fund projects and the way that we fund teams needs to change as well. And that's great. But in order to get there, you have to gain a lot of traction. You have to get a lot of trust, because suddenly you're talking about, $25 million, $50 million, $100 million investments. And you're saying we need to do them completely differently than we did last year. People generally don't buy into that. So you have to get some successes and some wins to gain trust before you can start funding your value streams. So you have that battle too.
Scaling Agile also means you change the way you invest your budget, and you cannot convince leadership to do so overnight.
You're changing the way you're funding value. You're not funding projects anymore. And that's the hardest thing that people has to understand. We're not financing projects. We don't have projects anymore. We have value streams. Here's what we're financing. Here's what's going to come out of that.
So you first need trust in this new system before leadership is ready to invest their budget in a different way. So here we are. This is the very first step. How do you create this trust? You create it through having first successes and wins, showing that Agile is working. What does that typically look like?
That's a great question. And it usually happens one of two ways. Either somebody comes in who is a great leader and manages to convince everybody to give them bunches and bunches of money and make major changes. That's very rare. Most often it happens with, these little guerrilla pockets that cropping up, the little guerrilla agility happening within the org. So a couple of teams form over here, a couple of teams form over here. And eventually they start doing good stuff, but they have problems with dependencies and alignment. They get as good as they can get with the organizational structure. So what happens is somebody convinces leadership management to change the organizational structure just for that group. So there's no longer the hierarchy, but they focus more on a matrix or a network, I think is what John Cotter calls it. And suddenly they get real success. So you get something out there in front of everybody and you say, hey, the other teams that are cropping up that are having problems, the reason they're not achieving the same success that we are is because we did this and they're still doing this. So that's normally where it starts. You have to get a couple of those wins, and it happens fairly organically, but you also have to get some leadership that is really willing to take that risk.
So in the best case, scaling Agile in the beginning is a fairly organic process. Hearing this, you may ask now, doesn't that take a very long time or can we maybe accelerate this process?
You can push it pretty hard. So you don't have to be that patient, but it does take time. It's not going to happen. We can't say, hey, we're going to change the way we fund everything in 3 months. Maybe you could, but I don't think it's going to happen that quickly.
So yes, it does take time to have those first successes and wins, and you should be prepared for that. Maybe you can push it a little bit, but you can't push it too much. Now, Greg experienced something very similar, and he's giving a vivid example of it.
But a recent experience I had, they have a VP who's over this whole engineering. He hired a guy to come in, and he brought in Rally as a tool, and he brought in a program manager to help do the SAFe transformation. And I came in also, just got hired through a vendor to help them out. And that was a good opportunity, a good change. There were pockets that were successful, not tooting my own horn, but the group that I had, I was fortunate that they were a bunch of young guys, they were engineers, and we were turning them now into developers. So going from network engineer to developer, at the same time you're introducing Agile and Scaled Agile, you're really asking yourself to do a lot of things. Ultimately, introducing Agile is what I did. I focused on, okay, these guys don't know anything about developing, so we got to figure out how to get them trained up. So I worked with their managers to get all of the training in place that they needed. And just, we spent a year doing that. And at the same time, we were still delivering. Just velocity was really low. There was a lot of, why do we got to do this? What is the point system? Relative sizing was like a mind blower for them. So having to come up with good examples to teach it to them and show it to them and walk them through it. And then also at the same time, find the people within the group who were more receptive to it, encourage them to take on more and do more. That's what I did. And I think that's why the teams, they turned them into automation teams that really started to pick up speed. And by the 1.5, 2 year point, I would call them not a mature Agile team, but becoming mature. And after, at 3 year point, they were really hitting their paces. They were pretty cocky. They kind of owned it, and it was good for them.
Well, again, as you can see, it could take a long time. Now, what's interesting here is Greg is owning this pocket, this experiment, this one team or maybe a few teams. He's going on and explaining why scaling Agile still failed.
The Scaled Agile part was not successful at that point. I don't think we had leadership buy-in, really. The VP, the guy he hired, that guy left, and I don't know, there was some kind of conflict, I don't know. But the VP never really understood what we were doing. And ultimately, for everything we were doing in this large, I want to say at least 400, maybe 1,000 people organization, he was basically the product owner for everything. Having an organization that's ready to transfer that responsibility and trust someone to become an actual product owner and then create a suite of them and align them with the customer value, that's when you're ready. That's what you need to happen. And that's the leadership thing. And that was a real eye opener for me. I'd seen successful installations in the past and how they worked. And I realized now that it was because up at the top, they knew what was going on. They recognized the value and they understood it, that they were going to get something that was better. And that was, people were holding themselves accountable rather than one guy being, the daddy figure and telling everybody what to do, which is just never going to work.
Great. Now you know a key mistake that you have to avoid: not aligning leadership, not having leadership on board. That's something we heard very, very often within our interviews in Project Scagile. Be aware of that. So we need those first successes, and to get those first successes, we need budget. And the budget we get through aligning and having leadership on board. Typically, and this is important now, you don't need every leader at the beginning. You actually only need one leader.
For people who are at the lower level or middle level, selling up is always a challenge, right? But if there is somebody in executive leadership team itself who is more transformation looking, like you will find some departments in every company which are more forward looking, like they will typically be called transformation or portfolio planning or some kind of organization you will find. I think identifying those people who are in executive position and who are forward looking, who are more tuned towards imbibing any new philosophy and supporting any transformation is key. If you don't find anybody, it will become definitely a challenge to sell upwards.
Okay, so that's a good tip. Don't try to convince every leader, but start with one person. Connect to this one person that is open to this. Now, this topic of aligning leadership is such an important topic that we heard very, very often that we actually have a whole free webinar on our Project Scagile website. I recommend to check that out. Now, we have this leadership level and we also have those team initiatives. How should we coordinate this?
So there are two levels you can start your transformation. One is at the top, second is at the bottom. Top meaning the leadership level, and second is the team level. Now, going extreme with any of this is, in my opinion, not good.
Okay, so we have to do this both bottom up and top down. Why not being extreme about one side?
Let's say you start with top leadership, right? You bring them on, you coach them, you tell them this is what SAFe is or any methodology is, and this is what it will bring you. So people at lower level will see it as a encroachment of their freedom. Simple mandates you bring, and people always kind of resist that. Okay, here we go again. Here is another thing coming from top leadership, right? At the same time, if you do a ground up approach where you let teams figure out, okay, let's go agile, and all the teams you figure out, what's the right model for you. You will get more buy-in from the team in that case, but the drawback is that every team will evolve in a different way, so it will not scale up very well. So one team could be doing sprint of 2 weeks, another could be doing 4 weeks. They could organize themselves in a very different manner.
Okay, I think this is a nice example showing that going extreme about one of those sides wouldn't make a lot of sense. Now, it would actually especially have negative effects on scaling.
And then there are things which are above team level, right? Where you have to sit back and look at, okay, what really is my value stream here? What really are my arts? Those things will not happen if you allow individual teams to just reorganize within their own domain, because their sphere of influence is very limited. Because if you're doing it perfectly, you have to do a reorganize. You have to reorganize your teams, which means you have to bring leadership into the fold.
Interestingly, when we interviewed Kevin from Germany, he had a very similar experience and opinion on this. Just to be sure, Kevin is at home, and his home is kind of a construction site. That's why you are hearing this weird noise in the background.
There's a challenge here, because having Agile is allowing the people to be self-organized. But if you start a project from the top down, you create structures before you learn about the needs and goals of your teams. What is actually needed as far as structures go to reach the goal. So scaling Agile cannot be implemented top down.
Now, Vivek again really supported this point.
So I think the right balance is basically you start at the both levels. You start at a leadership level, but make sure that leadership comes as a coach, provides resources, generates excitement in the organization, and let teams experiment within their own domain, let them fail. Just kind of give a very broad roadmap that, hey, this is what we are looking at. So try to sell it, market it rather than mandate it.
Kevin is now going even deeper for this scenario, having 2 layers, leadership and teams.
One good practice that I can only recommend is you start with those 2 layers, but you leave a gap in between. You leave that deliberately open. You don't fill it with structures, with rules, with here I give you this piece of information and here I get this status report back. You leave this deliberately open and let it grow from both sides. Let it negotiate. So you have this management team that needs some input from the development teams, and you have the development teams who need some, decisions or resources from the management team. But you don't over-specify how they will talk, how they will decide, how they will meet, and so on.
Again, you let it grow on its own, organically. Leaving the space and starting very small within these first experiments, that is something we heard pretty often within our interviews.
Start. just start. Start even if you will fail. Start by making something small working, and then you can enhance that. Remember, it's all about retrospective. It's all about check and redo. Plan, do, check, redo, enhance.
All right, so don't be afraid to fail in these first experimental teams. That's a natural process, and sooner or later you will have your successes. Just be sure to know that there will be teams that will be more successful than others.
There would be early adopters. There are some teams who tend to be good fit for Agile versus there are teams which will not be that good of a fit. Like a team which are generally customer focused, which are using new age type of architecture, microservices based. So these kind of teams, they have very modular functionality. They tend to do very well with Agile, as opposed to there are teams who are working on a traditional software like big ERPs or big enterprise data warehouses. They have very long lead time. They are typically kind of back-end type of teams, right? They will struggle. So give some space. There will be early adopters. There will be other teams who will be watching. Within those teams who are watching and which are more traditional, there will be people who are more of change agents. I myself, I'm coming from one of those teams. I have a SAP background, very heavy SAP background. I found it very difficult to initially implement Agile.
So possibly before starting those experiments, think about which teams could be more open to this, thus maybe creating those first successes earlier. Another tip in this context is by Kevin.
If you do that, it's very important to communicate a lot, because it will seem like chaos in the beginning. You just start a project and you say, yeah, find it out yourself how to talk to each other. We don't have structure yet. You have to be very clear about that it's that you want it that way so that the people can fill the gaps themselves. Without communication, it will just be chaos, and people will associate Agile with chaos, which it is not. It shouldn't be.
So yes, let it grow organically, but communicate a lot, especially between the layers. And don't give it too much structure. But Kevin also has an opinion on which ceremony you should have.
What I see as the core meeting, even at the beginning of a project, is something where the development teams showcase the product. In the beginning, it won't be much because they just started to work on it. So they probably will show more enablers. How do we prepare to develop the projects and so on. So this is a meeting with a touch point between the top layer and the development layers, so to say, that will live throughout the project or throughout the product lifecycle.
So you may think about having this mutual product demo, but all the other Agile ceremonies, let them pop up organically. Oh my God, we are noticing in our teams there's not enough communication going on. Maybe now it's worth a try to do those daily stand-ups that we heard about.
If you have recurring occurrences of the people always ask me about this and that, perhaps you need some structure to channel all those requests, have a meeting to spread the information and so on. If you have experience with what will be needed, you can also set it up. There's no problem with that, to set up something that you expect is necessary anyways, like a stand-up or a weekly information meeting or whatever. It's more about how do you fill those meetings with contents, with structure, with the agenda and so on. That should grow by itself, or should be grown by the participants.
Now, I hope you understand the power of this organic scaling. If people have this pain and this problem and this need, and then decide to do, okay, let's try out this daily, it won't feel like a top-down process, but like something that the team decided on their own. And if you do this the right way, this can really generate momentum. Sean actually experienced it twice.
And I did the same thing. I mean, most of the time you start off basically as a proof of concept, and you start off with engineering. And once you start showing the value and how it delivers and it's predictable, then other areas of the company go, how do we get that? How they've turned that around. They used to, they would not deliver on time. They'd be over budget. Now they're, on budget, on time, if not better, reduced defects. They've 80 to 90% predictable. How do we get there? And I've seen it in two different companies the same way, once you can show that you've changed, and again, it's usually development teams, that they are engaged. You're not having this huge amount of attrition. People are bought in, they're excited. They want to come to work. Okay, how do we do that with the rest of the company? It did so well. Let's make the rest of the company like that.
Great. Now that's what organic, natural spread of Agile looks like, without any pressure, just through seeing the advantages of it. Vivek has a very similar view on this.
But then there are folks who will get curious, they will cross over the other side, they will try to bridge the gap that, hey, there is something good going on there. Maybe it's not perfect. Let's give it a shot. We can customize it, we can mold it. So then you have now entire organization which is kind of experimenting in a different, from their different lens, from their different view.
As you probably noticed, we did not use a specific framework so far to scale Agile here. And the thing you should learn from this is generally, the first step in scaling Agile never is spending a huge amount of time deciding which framework you're going to choose. Still, obviously, frameworks are important. And so the next minutes of this webinar about this question, how should you view frameworks? If people ask me what is the best framework there is, I always say it's your own one.
Many organizations, they kind of focus on a buzzword, whether it's agile or lean or DevOps or SAFe or LeSS or whatever it is. And it can easily kind of become the end rather than the means to the end. And of course, if that is what is happening, we're just not likely to achieve what we want to achieve, because instead of focusing on outcomes, which is so important, it tends to shift the focus away from that, and it tends to shift us more towards what a lot of people would call outputs.
Yes, that is a common mistake, basically saying we have to stick to the book and implement this framework exactly how it is supposed to be. That may help you to deliver outputs, but we are here for the outcomes. And actually, Eric and Greg have a very similar view on this.
Companies take these scaling frameworks and they just go at them and they go, okay, I got the framework, I got the path, I got the playbook, execute the recipe card. And they're wondering, why aren't we winning in the market? Why aren't we not getting our customers to be satisfied with our product and delivering that highest value in the shortest time? Well, it's because we're of course we're scaling. Yeah, we're getting the benefit of scaling, but we're not going in the direction that is going to, as a company, as a visionary company with a purpose, that's really going to drive us to win in the marketplace.
Oh, plenty bad examples. There's been a few where maybe somebody saw something and they read something and they thought, oh, that's what we need. And they thought that it was just a way of introducing something to what they were already doing. And at some point they recognize that they're not ready for change.
So it should never be like, okay, this framework sounds good, let's implement it. Those frameworks have advantages, this very clear structure, but this could also be a disadvantage.
Scaling Agile is very often in the responsibility of managers, and they are very keen on using rules and using frameworks, for example, or using blueprints, getting some consultancy how to do that. There's a conflict here because in Agile, it's about the people. It's about doing the right thing in the right moment, and that's a human trait. That's not something that you can write down in a how to do Scaled Agile within 10 steps or something like that.
So how do you decide for the framework then? How do you know which one is the right one? Philip gives us a hint on how to start here, and it's actually not only the starting point for your framework, but also for your Agile transformation in general and your why.
Another important piece that I think sometimes we can easily forget about are just acknowledging, what are our pain points, because every organization, has areas where they struggle. So it's very, very important to get some clarity on what those things are, what is the impact of those pain points. And okay, once we've done that, what ideas do we have for steps that we can take to mitigate those?
Sometimes people ask me, how do you get this change readiness that is necessary for the Agile transformation? This is one of the answers then, start with the pain points. If we have a pain, everybody will be ready to do something about this on leadership and employee level. And it also helps to choose the right framework. John is always starting his Agile transformations with an assessment of what are the current goals and pain points.
I want to start with having some type of an assessment work. right? Interviews with key leaders within the organization, maybe have an executive workshop, have them start to retrospect themselves in the areas that are important to them where they're looking for a competitive advantage, right? Are they looking to release more frequently? Are they looking to develop a new product? What's important to them based off of the assessment? That'll help me formulate a roadmap for the transformation, right?
Once you know those pains and goals, then you can have a look at the different frameworks.
I look at all the different scaling frameworks, all the different agile practices as a toolbox or a toolkit. And I can pull from that toolbox and toolkit in formulating a list of ideas for them to help me prioritize.
Frameworks are just a toolbox, and a toolbox generally is there to fix problems. Now, we sometimes see organizations that are implementing a toolbox without knowing their problems. You have to be careful about that. Another symptom for this is, sometimes when we ask our customers who are implementing Ecometer, our organizational development tool, we are asking them, why are you doing your transformation? And they struggle to find an answer for this. And oftentimes we get very different answers from different persons. If you start with the pain, thinking about, okay, we have this box of tools, which of the tools is the right one to solve this pain, then you will probably have a good answer to these kinds of questions. Now, strongly connected to choosing the framework is having the right and hiring the right external or internal coach or consultant.
Everybody's trying to scale for different reasons. They're trying to align around their portfolio strategies. They're trying to manage dependencies at the team level. And for a lot of coaches, even experienced coaches, they want to go in there and they want to implement what's worked at a previous client and goes, hey, I did this, it worked really well. You guys should do the same thing. And it doesn't always resonate, right? So you have to kind of change up your messaging. Sometimes you have to scale it back a little bit and help your client along that journey. So really understanding what their needs and what problems they're trying to solve is critical in having a successful transformation.
Okay, what John just described is very typical and in behavioral science known as the law of instrument. If the only tool you have is a hammer, then you will treat everything as if it were a nail. Now, if the only framework your consultant knows is the Scaled Agile Framework, then she will try to solve every problem with this specific framework. But wouldn't it be better to have more frameworks, to have a bigger toolbox? That's the reason why we recommend to hire coaches who know different kinds of frameworks. And there is no best framework. Maybe it is your own one, but for example, the Scaled Agile Framework is regularly criticized. And on the other hand, for example, the Spotify model also is criticized even by employees of Spotify themselves. Based on the interviews we did within Project Scagile, we can highly recommend to choose from the different frameworks and to take only the things that you need, and also iterating on this and constantly improving. You can find even more thoughts on choosing the right framework in the video of my co-founder Jean within the Project Scagile webinar. Now, let's say you had these first successes and you communicated well on leadership and team level, but you didn't decide for a framework yet. What is the next step?
And then you can try to consolidate things around that. Okay, we have some level of understanding within these teams. Let's bring the higher level pieces up. Is there opportunity of reorganizing ourselves by value stream and maybe bring the back-end resource and the front-end resource together in one team, something like that.
Well, nice, that's perfect. You have all these experiments going on and you notice, this is going in the right direction, but we need a clearer communication. So in other words, you have this pain, and now we can look into our toolbox, we can look into frameworks. How can we solve this pain? The other thing that Vivek said is even more important. Now we can have a look at our value streams and align specifically around value. And that is a lot more important than choosing the right framework.
The biggest challenges is most businesses, I think, are aligned around tools and or skills. And I think for any business to be successful, and Agile is one of the best ways to get there, you need to align around your customers' value. So identifying your customers, whether they be internal or external, building out customer personas, understanding what they want, and then aligning your teams so that they're delivering the value that hits those customers is the key. That's the biggest challenge.
You want to deliver value faster. Now that is a core reason typically why you are doing this transformation at all. So you have to align around value creation. Steve and Vivek have a very similar perspective on this.
When you start scaling, if you continue to believe that you'll have your same committee meetings, your same stage gates, that's not gonna work. So you really need to focus on the flow of value. That's what's ultimately important for Agile teams. If we don't start forming our teams along value streams, the flow of value, and we think about them as organizational, we will certainly fail.
If you have done it right, where all of your teams are organized by value stream.
Okay, so we have to align around value. And frameworks, again, as a toolbox to help us here. Maureen is introducing a workshop format that can help us with this.
The group that wants to scale is not always organized around value. So it's like a silo that says, I want to launch, this initiative. But what they haven't done is they haven't really looked at that whole value stream map and figured out, okay, who are the other people involved in the delivery, right? It could be a different tower. And so while they may be optimizing their part of the value delivery, the other people involved aren't optimizing, right? And so you get this point where you're splitting features at the end of the program increment and waiting for another group to deliver them. So the customers are not necessarily seeing value faster.
So one thing you can do if you want to align around value is this so-called value stream mapping. Now this is a very big topic, and therefore we decided to have a whole webinar, again a whole free webinar on aligning around value. If that's interesting to you, you can find it on the Project Scagile website. Now Steve is summarizing the last points again.
In the beginning, if you don't focus on aligning your teams on the flow of value and making sure you have that vision and roadmap in place, you're not going to be successful in scaling. You can launch lots of Scrum teams, lots of teams doing Agile, but the organization will never become Agile.
You need this common goal, this North Star, this vision. The first step to developing this North Star, this vision, is understanding your why. Why is this change necessary? Why do you want to do this?
So when we're starting, what we're going to do is implementing these Agile methods. I would say the most important thing is focusing on why. Having a coalition, focusing on why. Why do we want to do this, right? And then educating ourselves as leaders. If we're leaders and we're responsible for this this direction where we're going for this this new way of work, being able to educate ourselves on those values and principles, and then looking at our business. So I like to use the business model canvas. It's really good to envision what does your business look like, find the value streams in there and the solutions we deliver, and then envision that future.
So having this clear vision and why is very important. We are having a lot of more thoughts on this in our free webinar on aligning leadership, again on the Project Scagile website. I recommend to have a look at that. Another interesting thought in this context, in Kent Beck's Beyond Agile Manifesto, you may know it, he's saying that team vision is even more important than individuals and interactions. Maybe that's even more proof to you that vision is very, very important. Eric gives a specific example for a vision.
So what happens is if I'm Tesla and I'm looking at, okay, well, we're all here and this is what our company looks like. And what is our vision? What is that North Star? What does that postcard of the future look like? And we'll go, okay, well, we want to put a colony on Mars. We want a shipping industry in space. Those are really our value streams. Those are solutions we deliver, and those solutions we deliver, well, what are the things we need to have that happen? And then let's create some objectives and let's agree to them. Let's share that vision together as leaders and execute on that plan.
So I will give you one key tip regarding your vision. Kiss it. Keep it short and simple. Even in case of your vision, just start with something. You cannot put everything you want into your vision. Just have a first version and then iterate on it. Yes, even in case of your vision. You have to iterate on your vision actually, because in the beginning it won't be that emotionally triggering, and that's what you need in case of a good vision. Now, if you want to learn more about this in the video of my co-founder Jean within the Project Scagile webinar, you can find more thoughts on a good vision. Now, let's say we have this good vision or why. What would be the next step?
Closely related to that is just the notion of, having some form of a roadmap. If you don't have something like that, which gives you some guideposts, if you will, over the near to medium term anyway, of what you want to accomplish, I think you will struggle without that. So I think that's something you have to arrive at reasonably soon. And I would say that's especially important. The bigger the size of the effort, the more teams, the more critical it is, to have clarity about that.
So you have to develop this roadmap. Now you might say, isn't the whole idea of Agile to not have a clear plan and a clear roadmap and, to be flexible instead?
Yeah, it sounds counterintuitive from an Agile perspective, but it's actually very Agile, right? Because you always hear about having a product roadmap, right? So you want to be able to have that long-term vision, but you want to be able to give yourself the opportunity to flex and pivot. So typically when I build my roadmaps, every 3 months, I'll have what I call a PPP decision. At the end of 3 months, we either want to persevere, right? Keep going down our roadmap. We want to pivot, change our roadmap, or we want to perish. We want to trash our roadmap. It's not adding value. Let's go in a different direction entirely, right? But those three decisions, we check in every 3 months at a minimum with the client just to make sure that we're going on the right path. So from an Agile perspective, if you're working on a product and you don't have a product vision and your product manager says, we don't have that product vision and product roadmap because we're Agile, right? You might want to talk to your coach about that, right? That product owner, product manager might need some help. So definitely having that roadmap, checking in frequently is the Agile part there that you want to do. And you're always looking to build and iterate on top of whatever your current roadmap or current situation is, right? So it's in the spirit of constant and relentless improvement. You got to start somewhere. You have to have that long-term vision. That roadmap's going to help you put those two together.
So yes, you do need those intermediate goals connecting your vision to your daily activities. And at the same time, you should have this meeting where you think about, okay, do we want to persevere, pivot, or perish? In psychology, there's this effect called plan continuation bias. Once you have a plan, you tend to stick to it just because it exists. And that's the reason why you have this PPP meeting, to make sure that you don't fall into the trap of this bias. A very specific workshop that you can do within your leadership team to prioritize for your roadmap was also mentioned by Jean.
We take everything that they want to do based on my toolbox. I might give them a list of 20, 30 different things that we can do. We can define roles and responsibilities. We could move to a single backlog. We can move from projects to products. All these different things we can pull up from the toolbox. And then we can rate it based off of importance or value to the organization. And we can also rate it on terms of level of effort to be able to implement these different toolbox items. From that, I can prioritize into different areas of my matrix, right? I'll have quick wins, right? Things that the organization views as high value, low effort. I can have big bets, right? Big value, but big effort. And after we get through the quick wins, maybe some of our big bets, we can start to take a look at what's in our maybe. And that really helps align that leadership organization into, as a transformation agent, what do I want to target first, right? What can I show and deliver value on quickly? And then we can start working on some of the bigger rocks down the line.
We are actually using this lean prioritization matrix that John was describing. Often internally within Ecometer, I really recommend to have a look at that. Now, if you want to learn more about the different approaches of the frameworks to develop this roadmap, we also wrote a whole blog article about this, comparing 5 different approaches here. Feel free to check that out too. Now, once we have those first successes, maybe even organically, we have this vision and we have a clear roadmap. Then everything is going already in a good direction. Now the question is, which are the next typical challenges that are awaiting us? The next minutes are about making you aware of those typical challenges.
More than tools and methodology, it's essentially a mindset change.
Humans just resist change, and that's the biggest challenge.
Getting people to accept change.
Changing our behaviors, changing our beliefs is really difficult.
Well, maybe you recognize a pattern here. Yes, so some say the biggest challenge when scaling Agile is...
Number one is culture, the culture of the organization. that the organization is used to, and how they've always implemented work. People don't want to change. Some people have been in the company 10, 15, 20 years. They think that's the only way to do it.
Trying to overcome decades of a business being run a certain way in certain silos, especially a scaled agile approach. Agile approach you can do to a team. You can have pockets of teams that run themselves that way. But when you're trying to go scaled, you're talking about the whole enterprise, and you're fighting a lot of energy from past.
Okay, so one of the biggest challenges is generally organizational culture. You should really be aware of this. And this is again a very big topic, so we have a whole webinar again on this, a whole free webinar on the Project Scagile website. Feel free to check that out. The other challenge that is closely related to this is the following.
Certainly that aspect of working with multiple teams, it can be quite a difficult challenge.
A lot of the frameworks talk about vertical communication very, very easily. They talk about chief product owner. We talked about a product owner team. They talk about scaling up.
Now the horizontal communication, that is a little more challenging.
Frameworks often talk a lot about this vertical integration, but if you have many trains and thousands of teams potentially, also it is important that they are aligned horizontally, that you have this horizontal communication. If they are not aligned horizontally, this is what Maureen is saying.
If you're seeing that there's a lot of cross dependencies between your trains, chances are you may want to take a look at reorganizing.
So please avoid that mistake. Again, we have a whole free webinar on horizontal communication. Have a look at that on our website. One thing that can heavily help you regarding both culture and horizontal communication and alignment regarding vision is setting the right agile metrics and KPIs. But be careful with them. It is not easy to pick the right ones.
There's so many wrong metrics. There are metrics that make a company or a team feel better about themselves. Oh, look, my velocity is 500,000 points every sprint because I just multiplied my points by 100,000. And those metrics really don't help.
For a long time, I couldn't even convince myself what kind of metrics I want to really capture.
Don't measure everything. You're wasting your time.
The core thing about agile metrics is align them to your goals. If you measure something, people will always do anything to optimize this measurement. Now, you can use that to your advantage, for example, through implementing cultural metrics.
Cultural metrics, I think, are a huge point, and they're often overlooked.
Ultimately, yeah, it's very much of value to understand where the team is at, but it still is an art when you're trying to measure what we're talking about is maturity, team maturity.
It is not easy to implement the right agile metrics and cultural metrics. The Spotify health check, for example, or the health check we are doing at Ecometer, those are two ways to do it. But this is a big topic, and again, we have a whole free webinar on our website. Feel free to check that out. Having the right KPIs is actually in this lean prioritization matrix. This is one of the quick wins to make sure that your vision and your why and your roadmap and your leadership team, basically everything, is heading in the right direction. Now, one other quick win regarding culture is the following thing.
If you are in charge of a company or a part of a company that needs fundamental change, I think a retrospective and good agile coaches to facilitate those is a very good starting point, so that the change can start or can grow from the bottom up.
So there's a reason why retrospectives are called the key ceremony in Agile. They can really help you to make this movement organic, so make sure that they are implemented the right way. Now, guess what? We have a whole free webinar on retrospectives. Feel free to check it out. The last thing I want to talk about is this. In later stages of the beginning of your transformation, you should definitely talk to other departments.
First, the leadership, you're going to do the executing leadership, the CEO, CTO, CIO, those people. You probably want to bring the CFO in so they can understand why you're doing, what value it's going to do, and how it's eventually going to affect that, finance and HR. So you're going to start at that higher level, but usually it's going to break off and you're going to start working on, the engineering and development side before you get to the HR and finance side. But you do want to make sure that you get to the finance and HR side, because you have to change the way they think too. You're going to change the way you're going to hire people. You're going to change what you're looking for.
We can't just look at agile transformations from an IT perspective. We talked about the importance of having executive buy-in earlier. Two other key departments within a typical traditional organization that's also key for the transformation, I would say, are HR and finance. HR practices have to be aligned with rewarding the proper behavior that you want within your agile transformation, right? So within our agile transformations, right, if an organization is typically very top down in the way that they do their performance reviews, right? I am the manager, I'm going to review my direct reports. That's not very agile. That doesn't lend itself to an agile transformation.
Scaling agile typically means that you scale it to other departments. So better talk to them sooner rather than later. The ING Bank actually did so. They scaled it to every single one of their departments. McKinsey has a whole case study on this topic. If you want to learn more about this, we link this within our Project Scagile webinar. Now, to summarize the key points of this webinar, firstly, have some first successes. This will help you to create this trust on leadership level. Then get to know the current pains and problems of the organization. This will also help to align the leadership team, and it will help you to pick from the different tools, from the different frameworks there are. Then develop this vision, always organize around value creation, and based on this vision and value creation thing, you can think about your roadmap now. Things that you have to be aware of is firstly your culture, and regarding culture, 2 quick wins could be having the right agile metrics, also cultural metrics, and to implement very valuable, good retrospectives. Now, if you have all of this, then the chances of your success are heavily increased. Now, I mentioned many webinars that we are also offering on our Project Scagile website for free. If you would only choose one of them, I would recommend to go for the one on aligning leadership, because that's the next topic on your agile roadmap.
Too often, organizations think it's all about the individual team, but the challenge is getting alignment from leadership.
That scares a lot of leaders. They got to where they are, climbing up the ladders of the structure that you're telling them that they got to tear down.
Within Project Scagile, we basically interview dozens of experts on how do you scale Agile the right way. And what's really interesting is that the word we heard most often is executive team, is leadership team.
Shiva says, burn down your father's house and build a new one. Find the guys that believe that in a company and you can do it.